A human female hailing from the grassy plains of Kuat, Bultar Swan was an eminent Jedi Knight in the decades preceding the Battle of Yavin. She was apprenticed to the noted Jedi Council Master Micah Giat, whose unique teaching methods laid the foundations of her training. However, Giat wouldn't live to see his Padawan reach her knighthood, losing his life in the Yinchori crisis of 33 BBY. With his close friend and fellow council master's untimely passing, Plo Koon would take up the mantle of Swan's mentor, completing her training and raising her to the rank of Jedi Knight. Following the completion of her trials, Bultar would visit the site of her first master's passing with Plo and listen to his recount of Giat's end. Despite having never felt his presence before, Swan could sense her mentor's pride in her progress as a Jedi and knew he was at peace in the netherworld of the Force. Bultar would go on to distinguish herself as one of the Order's finest martial artists, noted by her peers for having never taken a life despite her extensive combat experience. However, this record was not something that Swan took particular pride in, fully aware that her duties would eventually force her to lose it. This would eventually prove true after she was shoehorned into military service during the Clone Wars, leading her troops on the front lines. She once again demonstrated her skills by surviving the war, and even the Jedi Purge that followed. Until, that is, the betrayal of her fellow Jedi during a conclave on Kessel, which turned out to be an elaborate trap for Darth Vader. Following a titanic lightsaber duel, Vader was disarmed and surrendered to the Jedi. Though she was willing to accept the Sith Lord's pleas, several of her peers had other plans, and Bultar Swan's life came to an end. Allegedly the product of Imperial Grand Admiral Thrawn's secret Jedi and Sith cloning program, Jaden Korr was born on the galactic capital of Coruscant in 1 ABY. Discovered to be Force-sensitive at the age of 13 after a vivid Force vision led him to construct a fully functioning purple lightsaber from spare parts, Jaden was accepted into the new Jedi Order. He trained at the Jedi Paraxium on Yavin 4, where he befriended the fellow student Rosh Penn. The two were apprenticed under the legendary Jedi Battlemaster Kyle Katarn just in time for the disciples of Ragnos to launch their attack on the New Republic. Jaden ultimately led Jedi and New Republic forces to victory against the Sith cult, whittling away many of the organization's key players before rendering them totally powerless with his defeat of the resurrected spirit of Marka Ragnos. Now a fully fledged Jedi Knight, Jaden would go on to become one of the NJO's most esteemed Outer Rim field agents, proving his skills by surviving the Yuuzhan Vong invasion and later the Second Galactic Civil War, where he was hand-picked to be part of the Jedi strike team led by Master Kip Duran during the Battle of Centerpoint Station. While initially just as devoted to the preservation of peace as his Jedi brethren, Korr was greatly distressed by his experiences in both conflicts, which, in conjunction with his uncomfortable affinity for dark side abilities, eventually caused him to question his role in the Force, impeding his ability to draw on his full power. Fortunately, Korr was able to overcome his self-doubt with the aid of the smugglers Kadian Fal and Mar Ledai Shali, the latter of whom would become his Jedi apprentice, after a complex series of events led them to discover a batch of deranged clones grown from the genetic material of several Force wielders. Realizing the damage that could unfold should such monstrosities remain at large, Jaden resolved to hunt down the remaining templates even as they attempted to escape into the unknown regions. Over the course of his hunt, he would face off against Alpha and Seer, the doubles of Kam Solusar and Lumaya, and even the Rakatan force entity known as Mother, who had deceived the clones into freeing her from her prison. Following the entity's destruction, Jaden Korr would be assigned to guard the Jedi Council during a period of hostility with Chief of State Natasi Dalia, and was later instrumental in helping the Solos expose the former Imperial's implication in the Force psychosis outbreak. Alright, so my initial plan for this video was to do Jaden Korr versus TCW Darth Maul. But after gaining a more detailed understanding of Bultar Swan's capabilities through Ready 4's Ahsoka Tano vs Bultar Swan video, I realized that she was both better competition and a far more interesting opponent from a thematic standpoint. What really grabbed me about this matchup was the staggering amount of similarities between Bultar and Jaden, both being master-level Jedi Knights trained by esteemed members of the Jedi Council, whose unique focuses distinguished them from their peers. Bultar with her emphasis on unarmed combat ahead of saber training, and Jaden with his use of both light and dark side force abilities. Just to clarify a few points, due to the lack of images of Swan, I will be using fan art for the sections detailing her capabilities, while my breakdown of Jaden is going to be based off a compromise between the depictions of his capabilities in the Jedi Academy video game and the descriptions provided in the various NJO era novels he has appeared in since. With all that out of the way, I present Bultar Swan versus Jaden Korr. Bultar Swan and Jaden Korr are humans, Swan being a female likely in her late 30s to early 40s, and Jaden a male of nearly 40. Though somewhat unassuming at first glance, both Jedi were noted for their physical capabilities, largely transcending the usual standards of speed, strength, and dexterity that was common amongst their caliber thanks to their respective focuses. Bultar's decades of Terras Kaze and Viridian sliding hands training greatly enhancing her physical output, and Jaden's near constant service on the battlefield, crafting him into a veritable one-man army capable of engaging large groups of lightsaber-wielding enemies without tiring. In addition to his height, Jaden's most overt physical distinctions from Swan were the 3 fingers missing from his right hand, the result of his intense and, quite frankly, horrifying battle with Alpha on the frozen moon. This injury did not impede him in any way, though, serving as an aid to his emotional rehabilitation more than anything else. In regards to durability, Swan doesn't have very much to draw on, but given her extensive conditioning and the fact that her entire fighting style was based around close-quarters grapples and disarmaments, it's reasonable to assume that endurance training also factored heavily into her development. While shrugging off otherwise lethal blaster wounds and lightsaber hits is just a game mechanic, Jaden can still take an inhuman amount of punishment, perhaps the greatest demonstration of his endurance being the aforementioned gruesome fight with Alpha. Given that neither character boasts any sort of significant physical advantages or crippling weaknesses over the other, no edge shall be awarded for physical attributes or enhancements. As specified by her entry in the Power of the Jedi sourcebook, Bultar Swan was a noted Jedi Guardian who dedicated herself entirely to the study and practice of martial arts. Although lacking a significant quantity of feats to draw on, what little we do have from Swan speak to an extremely advanced skill set. Prior to her service as a general, she had been assigned to dozens of combat missions, presumably against criminals and thugs, and succeeded in all of them without taking a single life. During the Battle of Geonosis, she was one of only 3 knights among masters to survive the Petranaki arena, the others being Rothdel Masona and Ayla Secura. Unlike those two, however, Swan was formidable enough to survive the Clone Wars and the ensuing Jedi Purge. She even dueled Darth Vader himself during the Conclave of Kessel, and though she never properly defeated him, she was, again, one of only 3 Jedi to actually inflict some sort of damage with her lightsaber, though I will note that the Dark Lord had just been quite literally disarmed at the time. Unlike her contemporaries, Bultar focused the majority of her training on unarmed combat, developing a personalized hybrid hand-to-hand style that perfectly catered to her own unique view of combat. Swan's primary martial arts disciplines were Teres Kaze and the Viridian sliding hands technique. Also known as the steel hand style, Teres Kaze was created specifically for non-force sensitives to fight against Jedi. It required practitioners to develop a high level of speed and dexterity, and focused its techniques on the use of close-quarters grapples and parries. The Viridian sliding hands technique, the preferred form of Swan's first master, Micah Giat, was a lesser-known martial art that was presumably based around misdirection and sleight-of-hand techniques. Described as both graceful and athletic when pressing the attack, Bultar's hybridization of forms made her almost unmatched in the hand-to-hand combat arts, and she was even able to perceive every move her opponent is going to make before they make them while in prolonged physical contact. With such an incredible level of skill in unarmed combat, one might expect to find Bultar's swordsmanship to be comparatively lacking. And while this is true to an extent, she was no neophyte. As mentioned previously, after her first master fell in the Yanchori crisis, Swan was apprenticed to his close friend Plo Koon. Koon placed a much stronger emphasis on lightsaber training than her previous master, and taught her to use her saber to enhance her unique unarmed style. While Bultar's chosen forms have not been established in any source, my friend Ready4 theorized that she was a specialist in the Sarisu, Ataru, and Djemso forms, an idea that I agree with. Sarisu was the 3rd form of lightsaber combat and was almost entirely defensive in nature, employing tight, efficient movements to provide maximum defensive coverage and to conserve energy. Ataru was the exact opposite, using elaborate, flourishing swordplay reinforced by force-assisted acrobatics and physical combat techniques to outmaneuver and overpower opponents. Form 5 Djemso was developed in answer to the perceived offensive deficiencies of the aforementioned Form 3, and was built around the tactic of maintaining a strong defense and backing it up with strength-based counteroffensives. The use of these 3 styles as the foundation of Swan's personal form is suggested by the nature of her character and the technical aspects of her technique. Armed with a standard lightsaber with a green blade, she's capably deflected blaster fire, and was noted for possessing a powerful defensive technique when engaging other duelists. When on the offensive, she frequently relied on acrobatics, and the incorporation of unarmed combat into her lightsaber sequences was her stock and trade. Though not a strength-based power duelist, she was trained by arguably the greatest Form 5 master of the era, and she has even employed Psi-Tok maneuvers to cleave super battle droids in two. While she has never been depicted chaining force-based telekinetic attacks into her lightsaber sequences, I consider the use of such tactics to be well within the scope of her abilities. A clear pragmatist in every sense of the word, Bultar Swan's tactical sensibilities were straightforward but effective. On the battlefield, she faced her enemy's charge with calm efficiency, meticulously dismantling their defenses one by one until they had either surrendered or were rendered totally incapable of fighting back. When confronted by a lone adversary, her typical response was to stonewall their attacks with her lightsaber before disarming them and retaliating with a veritable barrage of punches and kicks. On the whole, Bultar Swan was a highly skilled combatant, and though her deviations from the more standardized Jedi training did leave her hampered in some ways, it also gave her several unique advantages, and she was ultimately a credit to both her teachers and her order. A veteran of both the Yuuzhan Vong and Second Galactic Civil War, Jaden Korr was regarded by the acclaimed Jedi battle master Kyle Katarn as his finest student, and hailed as one of the most capable field agents in the new Jedi Order. His skills and expertise were such that even the One Sith Order labeled him as a serious threat. During the Disciples of Ragnos crisis, Korr defeated scores of remnant Imperial stormtroopers and dozens of saber-wielding Sith cultists. While it is true that these cultists weren't exactly the be-all end-all when it came to lightsaber combat, as even the teenage students at Luke's Academy were more than a match for them, the simple fact that he was able to engage them en masse a mere 1 year into his Jedi training cannot be overlooked. He also vanquished Allura, a powerful dark Jedi, and Tavion Aximus, who was the former apprentice of Desan and the cult's public leader. Finally, and definitely most notably, Jaden overcame the spirit of the ancient Sith Lord Marka Ragnos after the latter had taken possession of Tavion's body during the Battle of Korriban. Considering Ragnos' reputation amongst the Sith of his era, and the fact that his spirit had just been supercharged by the collective energy of numerous Force Nexes, including Yavin 4 and the Valley of the Jedi, this indicates a ridiculously advanced skill level. Korr also waged a brief duel with Raylan Juru after a rather bizarre and confusing series of events had propelled the ancient Jedi Master over 5,000 years into the future. Although he was very nearly defeated by Alpha, the powerful but untrained clone of Jedi Battlemaster Kam Solusar, I don't see this as a major inconsistency, as the book makes it quite clear that the only reason the Mad Clone fared as well as he did was due to Jaden's guilt and emotional instability clouding his senses and hampering his overall combat performance. A state similar to the one experienced by the Jedi Master Rowan Shrine in the novel Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader. Following his rehabilitation, Korr would be confronted by Mother, a Rakatan Force entity, and though he never properly defeated her, he was able to keep her off balance long enough to devise a plan that contributed to her downfall. Addressing his lightsaber technique specifically, Jaden was a very utilitarian swordsman, the result of the NJO's emphasis on personalization and his training under a battle master. Upon his initial admittance to the Order, Kyle instructed Korr in the Shi-Cho velocities, as well as the strong, medium, and fast styles, which were the basic principles of saber combat taught at the Yavin Paraxium. Only after Jaden had attained mastery of the Academy basics was he permitted a more formalized lightsaber training. Though his chosen disciplines are not specified in any source, Jaden's personal style shared a number of striking similarities to Bultar Swan's, to the point where I believe that he too was a specialist in forms 3, 4, and 5. However, where Swan simply employed the fighting styles individually as needed, all indications are that Korr hybridized them into his own unique method. Armed with a standard lightsaber with a yellow-hued blade, Korr's saber offense paired off directed strength moves with dynamic full-body maneuvers and acrobatics, using pin-accurate power blows to either shunt aside or lock up a foe's blade, then quickly executing them with either a speed-based attack flurry or sweep. With his highly refined force senses guiding his blade, Jaden Korr demonstrated clear mastery of the Sum Gem disarming strike and the Ataru Suma rotations, which aided in his ability to undermine the defenses of opponents. As indicated by the novels Crosscurrent and Riptide, Korr also possessed some skill with Jar-Kai dual-weapon fencing, capably wielding his original purple lightsaber and a DL-44 heavy blaster pistol as secondaries during his battles with Mother and the clones. This dynamic swordplay was reinforced by his skillful integration of his Force talents, typically telekinesis and Force lightning to quickly disable or kill his adversaries. As with Bultar Swan, Jaden was noted to possess a lethal proficiency with unarmed combat techniques, and he frequently incorporated such physical strikes into his lightsaber sequences. Korr's technique placed a strong emphasis on intricate lightsaber attacks, but his aggression did not come at the expense of defensive viability. When fighting on the battlefield, he capably deflected blaster fire, and on one occasion even managed to redirect a shot from a starship cannon while in zero gravity. When engaging other duelists, he relied on tight, conservative parries to shunt aside strikes, and using the kinetic energy generated by his opponents to deflect attacks he couldn't meet head-on. Well-developed agility allowed him to back up this technique with highly intricate acrobatic evasions, and he was highly effective against large groups of opponents, even multiple Darksiders. Quite possibly the greatest field Jedi of his generation, Jaden Korr was a cunning and skillful strategist, distinguished by his quick-witted mindset and situational awareness. To this end, his battlefield conduct was based predominantly on the ideals of flexibility and improvisation. He is capable of being dropped cold into even the most horrifying situations and making quick and effective decisions to best respond to them. This chameleon-style focus makes him dangerously unpredictable, particularly when one takes into account his extensive combat experience. Furthermore, Jaden's concern regarding his inability to identify the ancient lightsaber technique employed by Raylan suggests that his go-to strategy in single combat was to analyze the technique and patterns at the core of his opponent's style, then tailor his own technique to exploit it. This in itself is not difficult to believe, as Kyle Katarn himself frequently employed such tactics. On the whole, Jaden Korr possessed a sophisticated and varied lightsaber technique, reinforced by acute tactical awareness and a powerful grasp of both sides of the Force. Remember how I said that the martial arts verdict for Darth Bane versus Shaak Ti was a painstakingly difficult one for me to call? Yeah, that one seems a lot easier now that I'm looking at this. On an overall tactical level, Bultar Swan and Jaden Korr were both highly intuitive freeform fighters who focused on undermining their adversaries rather than simply overpowering them. While I would argue that Korr's analytical method produced better results in the long term, it wouldn't be as effective against Swan thanks to her overwhelming emphasis on close-quarters saber defense and her personalized unarmed technique having no consistent pattern for him to analyze. That being said, The straightforward nature of Bultar's own modus operandi also means that she couldn't jockey any sort of tactical advantage over Jaden, as the NJO Knight employed many of the same strategies. Before we move on, I'd like to take a moment to address something that I'm sure some of you will be expecting me to harp on, that being the level of experience between the two characters. While both knights are approximately the same age, Swan was raised within the Jedi Order, whereas Jaden wasn't recruited until his early teens. This gives Bultar, barring a few years for her to get that whole walking thing down, roughly 9 more years of extensive sparring experience than her competition. While I have no doubt that this added experience granted Swan a more complete understanding of classical Jedi philosophy, I don't see it as having a major effect on this contest for several reasons. Firstly, 9 years of sparring experience isn't exactly as drastic as the 30+ years Shaak-Ti has over Darth Bane, or Obi-Wan Kenobi's hundreds of combat encounters versus Darth Plagueis' 4. Secondly, Jaden Korr was far more committed to saber training than Bultar Swan, and even trumped her in regards to number of years spent in military service, which I see as going a long way towards making up for this initial difference. In comparing their choice of fighting discipline, this contest is interesting because it's one of those rare instances where two individuals are almost identical in style, but radically different in their approach. Though Korr shared Swan's emphasis on speed, agility, and counters, his moveset was far more complex and varied, mixing and matching elements from the different fighting styles under his belt in order to enhance his flexibility and unpredictability. This isn't to say that Bultar was lacking for technical sophistication. Her ability to garner praise from Plo Koon and hold out for an extensive period against Darth Vader proves that. But the fact of the matter is, she didn't possess the drive nor the ability to invest everything into lightsaber combat the way either of those two did. Swan's Teräs Käsi Viridian hybrid was truly remarkable, but as a pure, unadulterated swordswoman, she was exceedingly linear. And when pitted against true masters, she's never proven that she could do anything more than cope. However, this isn't to say that Jaden would be able to crack Bultar Swan's defenses outright. We'd still be witnessing largely a contest of equals, and Korr isn't bringing much more to the table than a more balanced configuration of forms. A similar situation is at play with their hand-to-hand combat skills. Swan is easily the more refined and varied unarmed fighter, but Jaden is not unexceptional in this field, and he has made very effective use of his skills even if the techniques he employs are comparatively basic. For frame of reference, I see Swan's dueling abilities as directly comparable to Attack of the Clones era Obi-Wan Kenobi, with her unarmed skills being equivalent to that of Phantom Menace Darth Maul. By contrast, I see Jaden's level of skill as a swordsman to be about equal to that of TPM Darth Maul, with his hand-to-hand combat abilities being comparable to AOTC Kenobi. While the significance of dueling skills versus unarmed combat in a contest between two Jedi can be argued, I don't feel comfortable awarding either character the edge, as neither one of their respective advantages is significant enough to be a game breaker. As such, I declare Bultar Swan and Jaden Korr equals in terms of how their skills with martial arts stack up against one another. As a Jedi Guardian devoted to the study and practice of physical combat techniques, Bultar Swan obviously was not a committed Force wielder, and she didn't demonstrate a particularly broad skill set. That being said, she was acknowledged by Jedi Masters Micah Giat and Plo Koon to possess a powerful connection to the light side of the Force, the latter of whom even speaking to her of one day taking a seat on the council. Given the more somatic style of training Swan favors, it really is no surprise that the most prominent and developed ability in her arsenal was Force-based physical augmentation. In addition to the enhancement of reflexes and agility required to facilitate prolonged lightsaber combat and blast deflection, she was capable of augmenting herself to the point where she could engage and defeat large groups of adversaries without having to resort to lethal attacks. In regards to telekinesis, Bultar was about as capable as any other high-caliber Jedi Knight would be. Direct and quick on the draw, she was able to summon force pushes with enough kinetic power behind them to blast away groups of super battle droids, as well as advanced force jumps to escape hectic battlefields. Although Swan has never been depicted employing such powers in open battle, her entry in the Power of the Jedi sourcebook does credit her with the ability to lift and presumably throw heavy objects at her enemies. Likewise, while we have no direct instances of her penetrating the telekinetic defenses of an opposing force wielder to draw on, I do believe that she was at least competent in this area, at the very least able to stagger adepts of similar caliber to herself. On a more defensive note, Bultar was capable but not exceptional. While her character sheet lists telekinetic barriers as part of her skills, the degree to which she could employ them was only around that of a top-tier knight and not a fully fledged council master. With telepathy, she could of course employ the mind tricks that were common amongst all Jedi, but she took things a step further with her mastery of battle precognition, which allowed her to intrinsically know what her opponent's next move will be while in physical contact. Cycling back to the POTJ sourcebook for a sec, Swan's entry also credits her with an unspecified aptitude in the healing arts, allowing her to refresh and mend her body through the Force. Although she lacked any talent with offensive energy-based powers, Bultar did possess a limited facility with force deflection, formerly known as Tuta Menace, using the ability to deflect blaster bolts with her bare hands. While a far cry from an avatar of godlike force power, Bultar Swan was still a formidable and well-rounded force wielder who compensated for her narrow range with superb timing and a high level of control. While the storyboard's retconning of the classic EU means we'll likely never know whether or not Jaden Korr was in fact the result of Thrawn's attempts to basically make Force hybrid super soldiers, there can be no doubt that he stood as one of the most distinct and powerful Force wielders of his day. Korr's study and application of the Force was heavily influenced by the philosophies of his master, who viewed the Force predominantly as a tool and the denominations of light side and dark side as distinctions of insignificant difference. Though initially hesitant to accept this more pragmatic worldview, Jaden eventually succeeded in his efforts to balance the two realms. Accordingly, he studied every branch of contemporary and esoteric lore available to him and built up an expansive skill set. Like Bultar Swan, Force-based physical augmentation was a power that Korr was especially proficient with. He has enhanced his reflexes to allow for feats such as the deflection of blaster bolts, and the use of force-assisted acrobatics and strength were fundamental elements of his personal style. Notably, he's used the Force to enhance his body to where he could continue a marathon lightsaber duel and only require brief respites to regather his strength. Jaden Korr's telekinetic abilities were extraordinary, his applications ranging from subtle utility skills to devastating displays of godlike power. His basic force pushes were powerful enough to punch through stone walls, as well as hurl massive boulders and Korriban obelisks like a child's toys. During the Battle of the Unnamed Rakatan Space Station, Korr unleashed force waves with enough kinetic energy behind them to atomize the bodies of literally dozens of reanimated corpses. This feat was made all the more impressive by the fact that he accomplished it instantly and without any noticeable toll on his stamina. When he focuses more on control and less on brute strength, he was able to expertly manipulate objects, using directed saber throws to strike targets at a distance and omnidirectional shockwaves to sweep away loading crates and groups of stormtroopers. Additionally, Jaden has proven that he can reliably penetrate the telekinetic defenses of other Force adepts, striking them directly. If such stunning displays of precision still don't impress you, then I'd like to point out that Jaden Korr is also one of the few individuals in the entire Star Wars mythos who's been depicted successfully employing his powers against dark side Force entities. While incapable of outright manhandling Marka Ragnos with telekinesis, he was powerful enough to stagger him and even partially defend himself from the ancient Sith's attacks. Similarly, he was able to penetrate the defenses of Mother, who, mind you, was so staggeringly powerful that she radiated Force energy, enough to send her flying a full meter and break her hold on his apprentice. Jaden reinforced his offensive output with strong telekinetic defenses. During the skirmish at the Fairpoint Medical Center, he parried the combined force blasts of Soldier and Runner without too much strain, only halting when Seer added her own blast to the mix. Just as impressively, he used a concentrated force repulse to break Mother's telekinetic stranglehold. Given the insane levels of power that the three clones and Mother demonstrated and were credited with, these feats were roughly equivalent to Lord Qasim tanking Darth Bane's gathered force wave on the unknown world, demonstrating Korr's ability to rally against the attacks of foes even more powerful than himself. Though by no means an expert Jedi healer, he has employed such powers to recover from injuries and improve his combative longevity. Jaden's unique view of the Force allowed him to develop into a formidable telepath. He's used mental persuasion to compel soldiers into attacking their allies, Force concealment to hide his Force signature from other adepts, and Force bonds to allow for the communication of feelings, thoughts, and images across vast distances. On a more intricate level, Korr could utilize advanced Jedi meditation techniques to shield his mind from the corrosive influence of the dark side of the Force, a skill he learned from Kyle Katarn. Additionally, he also boasted a limited facility with farsight, able to catch brief glimpses into the future, though they were involuntary. Due to his status as a Jedi field operative, which dealt heavily with stealth and ambush, Jaden's sense abilities were particularly advanced. With Life Sense, he's detected the presence of soldiers outfitted with cloaking equipment and even maintained awareness of Nyas Nin despite the Unbarn assassin's ability to sever a target's connection to the Force. With Force Sense, he could evaluate the alignments of other adepts and deduce the full meaning behind a Force vision while still experiencing it, a rare accomplishment even amongst the greatest of the Jedi. In the realm of energy-based powers, Jaden Korr was a master of Force Lightning, and it served as one of his primary offensive abilities. In combat, he was able to lash out at lone and multiple targets with enough intensity to kill or incapacitate them almost immediately, and though he has never been shown doing so, it is highly implied that he is capable of flash frying them as well. For defense, he developed skills with force protection and force absorption, notably using the latter to negate the effects of Marka Ragnos's force drain ability. At the end of the day, Jaden Korr was a powerful, varied, and above all else intuitive tactical force wielder, the ideal Jedi Sentinel. As the physicality, martial arts training, and tactical ingenuity of both combatants effectively cancel out, this confrontation is ultimately decided by their force abilities. However, before I get into the specifics, I'd like to take a moment to quote a passage from the novel Yoda Dark Rendezvous by Sean Stewart, as the overall dynamic between Bultar Swan and Jaden Korr mirrors that of the Jedi apprentices Scout and Hannah Ding. Realistically, Hannah was a much better fighter. Physically, Scout gave herself a very slight edge in speed and strength, thanks to her extra training. Technically, they were comparable. Hannah possibly stronger with the lightsaber, while Scout was definitely ahead in the unarmed techniques that Master Ironhand taught. But when the Force was added into the equation, the contest wasn't even close. Hannah was 14, and her use of the Force was on an entirely different level from Pax Chivix. Polished, strong, and supple. Scout watched her warm up across the chamber, leaping ridiculous distances into the air and then drifting down, light as a snowflake falling. Purely in terms of innate force power, there is no question that Bultar Swan and Jaden Korr stood amongst the greatest Jedi of their time, with potential that outstripped even that of their respective masters. The big difference between them is that Swan was a very martially focused combatant who treated her force abilities almost wholly as a supplementary tool, whereas Jaden funneled more time and energy into combative abilities, resulting in a broader and ultimately more applicable skill set. Both were capable practitioners of force heal, so that cancels out. In the realm of physical augmentation, both characters have showcased capabilities far beyond the usual standard. While Swan likely takes the edge due to her specialized training, it's not by an overwhelming margin that could affect the outcome of this contest. It's a very narrow power designed to serve a very specific purpose and doesn't really leave any room for alternative applications. Furthermore, Korr has only been outperformed by a precise application of force empowerment once, and the one time it happened, he was squaring off against a towering muscle tank while also having his connection to the Force severely compromised by his emotional instability. Needless to say, these are not factors that would be present here, so Swan's slight advantage does little for her. With telepathy, both could manipulate the weak-willed and perceive the future in their own ways. Though Swan's battle precognition allowed her to anticipate her opponent's moves, it wouldn't be very useful here, as Jaden's life sense and force sense abilities provide similar benefits. Telekinesis isn't even a contest, as while both Jedi have displayed an aptitude for instantaneous usage, Bultar's magnitude and variety simply pale in comparison to Jaden's. Furthermore, Bultar's disinclination to employ lethal attacks means that even in the unlikely event she gets through Jaden's robust force wall, he would still have an opportunity to defend and retaliate before he is subdued. Although the integrity of Swan's own TK barrier could easily be argued beyond what's listed in her character sheet, she would still be hard-pressed to defend against such a powerhouse. Another notable advantage in Korr's corner is his greater aptitude with energy-based powers. In addition to the wide range of defensive coverage offered by Force Protection and Force Absorption, his mastery of Force Lightning furthers his ability to bring a conclusive end to this confrontation. Though many would be quick to point to Swan's facility with Tuta Minis as compensating for this, her alternative interests virtually guarantees that such an advanced application of the ability would be well beyond her. At the end of the day, Bultar Swan is a truly formidable combatant who is not to be underestimated. And while I do believe that she would put forth a truly valiant effort in a purely physical confrontation, in the end, Jaden would overcome her using his greater versatility and aptitude with combat-oriented force powers to his advantage. For these reasons, I simultaneously award Jaden Korr the edge as a force wielder and proclaim him the winner. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this latest installment of the Versus Series Season 6. As always, you are free to leave suggestions for future battles in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys later.